Good evening and welcome to today's meeting of the Joint Public Protection Committee. I'm Councillor John Harrison, the Chairman of the committee. The other committee members in attendance are Councillor John Porter, who's on screen from Bracknell Forest Council, Councillor Graham Bridgman and Rick Jones from West Berkshire Council, and Councillor Bill Sohn and Barry Patman from Woking Borough Council. We're being supported by a number of officers from 3 authorities, including from the Public Protection Partnership. They're in attendance either in person or remotely. Before we start proceedings, I'd like to explain for the benefit of members of the public who may be watching that tonight's meeting is being held both over Zoom and with councillors present and COVID compliant in the council chamber in Market Street, Newbury.
Point of order, Chairman, your camera's not on, so whilst I can see your non-image, as it were, in Zoom, I don't think anyone in the public will be able to see you.
Thanks for that. Now my picture is on there, so not that I really need to be seen, but it's good. People know where I am now. So. With councillors are present in the chamber and COVID compliant in the council chamber in Market Street, Newbury, and some are dialing in over Zoom. I can confirm that those present in the chamber are sitting socially distanced and are thus permitted to remove their face masks while seated. The meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Do members have any questions about the way in which the meeting will be conducted before we proceed? Okay, item 1 is apologies. Clark, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chairman, we have had apologies from Councillor Hilary Cole, and Councillor Graham Bridgman is substituting for her.
Thank you. Are members willing to accept the meeting minutes as recorded in the committee papers as an accurate recording of the meeting? Okay, I'll propose that. That's seconded. Thank you. Those in favour? Okay, I think that's unanimous. So I will be signing the minutes after this meeting. Item 3 is the outstanding actions from the previous meeting. Committee is to note that Sean Murphy has provided Councillor Sohn with information on air quality monitoring around the M4 smart motorway as requested at the previous meeting. Item 4 is declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Would members please raise their hand if they have anything to declare in this meeting? If something arises in which you realise subsequently that you do have an interest, please make it known to the committee at the time. Item 5 is public questions, and we note we have not received any, so we'll move on to item 6, the forward plan, pages 13 to 14 of the agenda. So looking at pages 13 and 14, do members have any additional items that they think we should be looking at? I think it's a fairly full work programme. Yes, sir.
Chairman, not an item I want to add, but simply a question really for officers, I suppose. Item 3 on the plan, item 11 and item 23. 3 in the commentary says that it's for priorities over the next 3 years. It says it's 22 to 24. Well, depending on how you work that, I make that 2 years. It's either calendar years, 22, 23, 23, 24, or it's municipal years. And I would normally think if you were going to have municipal years, you'd go to the end of the final municipal year rather than the start of the final municipal year. So if it's a 3-year plan, I would have thought it's 22 to 25. And at item 23, if it's a 3-year plan next time round, it would be 23 to 26. And my question is, therefore, if that's correct, whether the communication strategy at item 11 is a 2-year plan or a 3-year plan. Perhaps Mr. Murphy can assist us.
Yeah, Mr. Murphy, Do you have any comments on that?
I don't actually, Chair. I'll go away and look at that point. It's a very interesting point, because obviously the next item on the agenda tonight is the work plan for 21 to 23. Now, so what we have basically is, I think what we're really talking about is a refresh, and what we're trying to do is obviously not develop a completely new plan each time, but to refresh it. But I will go away and clarify that for the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Are there any other questions? Okay. Further items to note is that a response to the Bracknell air quality status report is still awaited from DEFRA. We understand there's nothing particularly wrong with that. It's just got a bit delayed, and it'll be brought to the next meeting if available. Item 7 is the PPP delivery plan 2021 to 23, if those years are correct. Mr. Murphy.
Yes, thanks you, Chair. The years are correct. So back in June 21, this committee received what was called the strategic assessment for the service. So this was an examination of the evidence of things that were coming into the service. For example, the service requests that come in, some of the new legislation that was on there, local priorities, and that set out basically the priorities for the service going forward. Now, obviously, those priorities in those terms were only set for Wokingham until the end of March as part of the shared service. We did at that time say that we would actually come back with a delivery plan to explain how those priorities were going to be put into, I suppose, into action really, and translate from priorities into delivery on the ground. So what you've got before you tonight is that delivery plan. So just talking a little bit about the model of the delivery plan. So the service, as members will be aware, is built around the national intelligence model. So the national intelligence model, as part of that, looks at things from 3 aspects. It looks at things from prevention. So obviously the best thing we can do with respect to everything really is to prevent harm. So it looks at it from the point of view of prevention. Also looks at it from the point of view of intelligence gathering. And how we can actually get better intelligence, or how we can better use intelligence to either drive preventative factors or enforcement, which is the 3rd aspect of the plan. So what you will see in the plan that's before you tonight is the priority areas broken down with some high level sort of targets really, well, not targets, but high level kind of indicators of how we're going to actually deliver those against those targets. So for example, housing, or whether it's air quality, or whether it's something like doorstep crime, and there are ideas there as to how those will be delivered. Now, obviously, this is fairly high level. If it's approved tonight, and some of this work is already ongoing, but if the plan is approved tonight, then obviously each of those areas will be backed up by a much more detailed project delivery plan, so that officers on the ground are able to deliver against very, very clear objectives and targets, with a full evaluation of each of the project areas at the end of it. There is, when you set the priorities, there was one priority which related to COVID recovery. That isn't in the delivery plan, because obviously that's very much an ongoing thing at the moment, but I have referenced it in the report. But we have added one to the delivery plan, which wasn't in the priority areas, which is around health and safety at work. And that is I think probably the last item in the delivery plan from memory. So, that it is really kind of basically the introduction to the plan. What I would say is that communication is very, very important to this. So communication cuts across all aspects, whether that's enforcement, whether it's intelligence gathering, or whether it's the preventative actions. And you will see that as a running theme throughout this. The other thing I would just also say is that obviously this is very much contingent in being able to start to get back into some business as usual working. Obviously, we're in a very moving, I suppose, very changing situation, fast changing situation at the moment. But we, as I say, a fair number of these projects have actually started or will start in the near future should they be approved tonight. So that's my kind of introduction, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. And before our eagle-eyed members of the committee start asking questions, there are a couple of mistakes in the covering report on the equalities, environmental and health impact, positive, neutral and negative. Those should be positive rather than negative assessments against the policy. So that's a typo we spotted at our pre-meeting.
You're absolutely right, Chair. I had meant to correct that actually at the beginning of this introduction. Thank you.
So I'd like members to contribute on this item if they'd like to make a point. Yes, please, sir.
Thank you, Chair. John, can I just clarify the terminology in the report to improve my understanding? I apologise that I wasn't really part of the committee at the time the strategic assessment was done and the priorities were done. So this is probably through ignorance. But on page 4 of the report, 26 of the pack, you refer to themes, priorities and projects. The pages that follow that start number 4, e-crime and so on, are those themes, priorities or projects? And because I think what I'm trying to focus on, which lines here are the projects that form part of the delivery plan?
Thank you, Councillor. Just to explain, actually, and I should have explained in the introduction, actually, that there are, I suppose, really, when you look at it, kind of horizontal and vertical priorities in here, so that there are a number of cross-cutting priorities. So e-crime, the example you've chosen, is very much a cross-cutting priority because actually it touches upon very many areas of the work that we do, from licensing through to trading standards, maybe through to housing issues and a range of others. The other ones that fit in with the cross-cutting priorities are vulnerable adults and children, climate change, safer streets and safeguarding, and that includes the elements that relate to modern slavery as well. So they are the cross-cutting priorities to the service, then they're followed by, I suppose, really a number of vertical priority areas, but obviously they overlap with the cross-cutting areas. Just going back to how the whole thing fits together. When the inter-authority agreement was set up, basically back in 2017, when it came into effect, there were a number of priorities that were set for the councils as starting priorities. So they were things like safer communities, public health and well-being, economic development, protection of the environment. So it is those kind of themes that feed into the kind of priorities of the service as well. Now they were the kind of the themes that were set at the time of the agreement. They reflected what all of the authorities at that time had as their priorities, and still very much do so today. Actually, when you look at them, each authority calls them different things, but actually we're all looking at those as important areas. They then feed into the priorities, and then ultimately basically down into the projects. And that's basically how the thing is put together.
And the projects are the line items under prevention, intelligence.
Yeah. So the projects. So basically, if you take, for example, let's take one example. So if you look under the housing, the housing priority, you will see that, for example, there is something there about looking at buildings which are being converted, say, from commercial to residential or from industrial to residential. That would be a project with underneath the housing delivery priority, if that makes sense. So there may be several projects underneath each of the priority areas. And they each will have their own project and delivery plan with their own objectives.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Porter and Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Just 3 quick questions, if I may, for Mr. Murphy. The first one is on the overweight vehicles, where you say you're going to go for HGVs, but will that also include 3.5 tonne and 7.5 tonne, and also long base transit vans? And can you tell me how we actually weigh them? How many weigh bridges have we got, or have we got a portable weigh bridge? That's the first question, please, Chair. Do you want the other two, Chair, as well?
I can actually answer you on that, because I attended an operation with PPP and with Thames Valley Police on the Bagshot Road in Bracknell several weeks ago, where we were using a portable weigh bridge and weighing the trucks and recalling over anything that looked a bit dodgy. And quite a number of vehicles were pulled over, and a number of vehicles had to change their tyres on the spot, as well as detecting several vehicles with too much on top of them and insecure loads and that sort of thing.
But that included 3.5 and 7.5 tonnes.
Yeah, Mr. Murphy, if you've got anything to add.
Yes. So, so obviously it's goods vehicle only, Council Board. So there are those that would fall within the definition of goods vehicle. Obviously, there's a separate definition for heavy goods vehicle, HGV. But we two aspects of this. One of them is the overloaded vehicles, which Councillor Harrison has just alluded to, so stopping vehicles, and actually the weigh pads that we had there on that day, actually I think would probably belong to the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency. But what we would normally do is use weigh bridges that we have identified for the use of weighing vehicles. So these are weigh bridges that fit into a cycle where they're tested on a regular basis, so that we can vouch for the accuracy of them, so that when we use them, basically we can be sure that they're accurate and suitable for weighing of vehicles for road traffic purposes. The other aspect of it is weight restrictions, which I think is maybe the one you're also alluding to. So this is kind of the 7.5 tonne, 18 tonne restrictions that you see, and we do basically do some enforcement around that as well.
Okay, thank you. Second question is on the cold calling zones. I'm just wondering whether or not we could actually make every area a no cold call zone, especially to protect our vulnerable residents, because I don't know how we can actually identify where all our vulnerable residents are. So would it not be a better idea to actually make the whole of Bracknell, West Berkshire and Wokingham no cold calling zones, which would then be a lot easier to enforce?
Chair, yes, I'm happy to answer that. So effectively, cold calling is legal. And that's the starting point for this. So we have to look at some reasons why basically we can work to put in a no cold calling zone area, and that has to be a very clearly defined area. This is based on the legal advice that the Trading Sample Services have had nationally. So the kind of thing we're looking at basically is incidents in the area. We also have to do a very clear survey of people in the area to make sure that is their will. And then once all of that is done, then basically we can adopt an area, and quite often it may just be a road or a few roads or a in some cases a village. In fact, my colleague Toby Green, if you want to know more, Toby has led on this, is on this call. Toby, is there anything you want to add to that, if I may, Chair?
Thank you. No, we have got quite a few no cold calling zones within the PPP area, and generally they've come about from reports from the police or concerned residents, especially where there's elderly or vulnerable people living. And we always look to try and get a zone wherever there's one requested. Sometimes it's been part of a road, sometimes it'd be a full road, or sometimes it'd be an area a lot bigger. But as long as a request comes in and we can get at least 2/3 of the people to say, yes, they would like a zone, then we will look to create a zone. We'll put the signage up, we'll give the stickers out. And I think the last criminal case was taken a couple of years or so ago, when there was a double glazing company that was actively door knocking in no cold calling zones. And that formed part of a bigger case taken by another authority, but we had to take statements, and they were charged with offences for aggressive practices for cold calling.
Okay. Can I just ask a follow-up question? Are these zones then readily available on like the PPP website? so people know that they're in the zone?
People,
Especially for new people moving in.
So a zone will have a sign, a metal sign at the start, at each end of the zone, on the lampposts. So it'll be clearly designated on the road, and each house will have a sticker. If anybody wants to apply for a new zone, then, like I say, I would hope that that was on the PPP website. I'm sure it is. But yes, if you are moving into a new house, then it should be reasonably clear once you've walked up and down your street that your house is within one of these zones.
Okay, thank you, Toby. Thanks, Sean. And my final question is on animal welfare, especially with the article in the news today about pedigreed dogs having their ears clipped, which is illegal in this country. So I'm just wondering how vigorous our enforcement would be against these type of breeders, and if we then ask them to actually definitely prove that such a treatment was carried out abroad, although we should be discouraging that sort of treatment to our dogs.
Yes, I saw that actually in the news today, actually, Councillor Porter. I mean, clearly, basically, that would be, I mean, the article was saying it was a welfare breach under the Animal Welfare Act. We are responsible for enforcing the Animal Welfare Act. Normally with pet animals, obviously, that's done by the RSPCA, but we do have powers to enforce, and certainly we would enforce in relation to any breeders that we had in our area that were either licensed or unlicensed, or, you know, that effectively should have been licensed, or people selling animals in our area that should have been licensed or unlicensed, basically. We would look into it. So yes, we have those powers to actually deal with things like that under the Welfare Act.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Murphy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Chairman. Three things. Firstly, to follow your lead on grammar and spelling. Mr. Murphy won't be surprised at me raising something. On page 9, under safer streets, if you look at the second bullet under prevention, something's gone awry there. I think that's probably work with licensed sectors, I suggest. Found it? Eight, safer streets, second bullet down under prevention. Yeah. The other two, just to flag up, make sure that PPP are in line with our health and wellbeing priorities, because these things get discussed, obviously various aspects of various things get discussed all over the place. Two particular health and wellbeing issues. Firstly, under 10, improving standards in the private renter sector, just to flag, I don't know that it needs to go any further, that there was a discussion at the West Berkshire Domestic Abuse Board the other day about making sure that private rental agreements had something in them about being able to exclude a tenant if there was domestic violence. So if you're working with private landlords on other subjects, maybe that's just something you could have in the back of your mind when you're looking at rental agreements. And then more generally, all three authorities in Berkshire West, so that's Wokingham, Reading and West Berkshire, will either have recently or are about to sign their joint health and wellbeing strategy. We signed ours at Health and Wellbeing Board a week or so ago. And just to flag that, some of the aspects of this are cross-cutting with that strategy. So, for example, safeguarding, both aspects of safeguarding. I think you've got vulnerable adults and children, safeguarding, childhood obesity and alcohol and tobacco consumption all appear as elements of the strategy. So just to make sure that PPP are talking with health and wellbeing colleagues and public health colleagues when they're looking at these aspects, so that we all sing from a very similar hymn sheet. Thank you, Chairman.
Chair, if I just may respond to the second point. Obviously, as Councillor Bridgman knows, I'm aware of the content of the Berkshire West strategy. As you say, a number of these things touch on things that are in that strategy, and a number of these are pieces of work that are already going on, for example, in West Berkshire. So we have a very a very comprehensive strategy around alcohol and tobacco and young people that covers everything from access to an education programme in schools. And that's exactly the same in Wokingham. So we've worked with the public health team in Wokingham now for many years to deliver a very, very similar programme and strategy, which includes, I say, not just the enforcement elements, but the education programme in schools. And we will obviously continue to do that going forward. That's plan. As we also do actually do some of this work as well for Reading Borough Council, so we've got a good reputation for doing this. In terms of Bracknell, this is so we obviously carry out a lot of the enforcement work in some of these areas, but we are looking to expand the public health remit in Bracknell, and we have been in discussions now with the new Director of Public Health for East Berkshire around the expanding of the education remit.
Thank you. Do any other members have a point to raise on the report? I see no hands up virtually or physically, so I'll move on to propose the recommendation that we approve the delivery plan as written in the agenda papers with a few corrections for spelling and ticks in the wrong places.
Chair, could I just make one final observation that I meant to make earlier? So obviously I have discussed the fact that that obviously this only applies to Wokingham until the 31st of March. I have spoken to colleagues at Wokingham about how it will apply to those services that will be like trading standards going forward, because obviously I would imagine that some of this probably is something you would want to retain anyway in terms of priorities. So just to reassure Wokingham members that those discussions are ongoing and there'll be a very smooth transition for those services. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Do I have a seconder for the approval plan? Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Is that approved? Any against? That's carried. Item 8 is the training and development plan. And I understand that Mr. Toby Green will be speaking on this one for us.
Thank you. Hopefully you've all had a chance to look at the training plan. Just in brief summary, so the role of regulatory services is vast, as we all know. There's hundreds of pieces of legislation that we enforce. Couple with that, the expectations that we want our officers to carry out that enforcement professionally and competently, and we need them to comply with various standards and codes of practice. Is no mean feat. But on top of that, obviously, we want to maximise their impact whilst they are going out. So we've got to make sure that they are both competent and confident in dealing with other areas such as safeguarding or modern slavery. We don't just want our taxi licence officers just checking for taxi badges or all tyres and things like that. We want them to be having discussions with the taxi drivers about child sexual exploitation or county lines and everything else. So overall, as a service, the best service needs the best officers, and obviously the best officers need the best quality training and development that we can give them. So looking at the workforce planning, we do struggle to appoint to officers within our geographical area. So we've made great efforts to build our own. We've taken on apprentices. We've got a kickstart person. These officers obviously take resources from the service, but obviously they really do deliver as well. And we've been really pleased with the results that we've got from the apprentices. So generally, the PPP does do very well in delivering with its training development historically, and hopefully the new system that I've designed in accordance with other managers, it's basically an attempt to streamline and standardise the training but leave the flexibility to leave it dynamic, because that is the world that we operate in regulatory services. Things are always changing, and we're always getting more things added to our workload. So, like I say, it's about reducing the amount of bureaucracy, but standardising and leaving it as dynamic as possible. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Bridgman.
Well, one, I think I know the answer, but I just point out that both in the report and in the plan itself, there is an abbreviation used, which, so far as I can, and I've looked through it, but I'm happy to be pointed to it, isn't defined. It's GRT. Now, I'm guessing that it stands for Gypsies, Romanism, and Travellers, but it would be helpful if abbreviations are used. For example, right at the front of the report, we have Public Protection Partnership, open bracket, PPP, close bracket. Well, I think we've all become pretty used to the phrase PPP, so that possibly isn't necessary for the committee. But certainly, if you're going to use a phrase like GRT, I think I would expect to see it defined somewhere. Now, I apologise if it is defined and I've missed it, but I make that point.
Chair. I think, the report is quite clear, and I think I'd agree that we want the most skilled and fulfilled, I guess, officers in service as we can, and therefore training is absolutely vital. I agree with it. Under the recommendations, it says agree the timing, training and development plan and associated budget for the forthcoming year. And although I've looked as carefully as I can, although I've seen reference to around £300 per officer, I have not actually seen any budget statement put in the plan. And I think that would be helpful to know what would be the total budget being allocated to training compared to the total budget for the service.
Yeah, I think actually you're correct, Councillor Jones. There isn't actually then a reference to a budget apart from an approximate per head spend or allocation for the service. So, obviously that would have been picked up previously when the whole budget was set for the service, which would have included the training and development budget. I'm not quite sure. I can't really add anything much more to that, except for the fact that probably what we're asking you to is to agree the training and development plan, and perhaps recognise that the spend per officer is perhaps a more appropriate recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I think what we'll do is move we move the plan and not the budget, because that's taken care of elsewhere. So
Chair, if I may, on the same point, and Councillor Jones is absolutely right, and we've had sort of similar discussions to this about other items, which is that I hesitate to say that this committee sets any budgets. It might recommend to its constituent councils that they might set a budget around PPP activities and fees and charges and so on and so forth. But I seem to recall a discussion where we decided that we didn't have the power, even if we wanted to set a budget.
You're quite right. The budget that you recommended back in September was recommended to the councils, and that is now going through the budget cycle in both Bracknell and in West Berkshire as part of the budget setting process. Could I say one thing on the plan? Because I think what we've tried to do here is to mesh the I suppose really going back in history, the qualifications and the training that we had were all about this new piece of law or this new piece of practice. I think as Toby has said, what the plan has tried to capture is those cross-cutting skills and actually the soft skills, which are very much now part of the job, probably always were part of the job, but are very much more recognised now as part of the job. And they are the ones that we're developing for all officers within the service. And I do think this is a step forward, and certainly as a service and a service manager, I think basically, and really as a committee, I think we should be very proud of the achievements that we've made, certainly in developing staff through the system. A lot of our professional officers are staff that we have brought through ourselves at various points into the system. It's what we have to do because of the market out there, but it's the right thing to do as well. And as I say, we've got a steady stream now of apprentices coming through. There are new qualifications coming online that we will look to get them in apprenticeship qualifications, and I think the future looks good in developing that programme.
Yeah, I would concur with that, Chairman, and I think I recognise that the comments about soft skills are increasingly important. I think people react to people with those skills far better than the more officious things that we've been used to in the past.
One, thank you. Thinking about our buyback services that we may wish to come into, this isn't necessarily one that we've agreed to come into at this stage for the training. Would it be a service that we could buy into when we wish?
Thanks, Councillor. So, I mean, to be honest, we already work cross with other authorities around training. We always have done, really. Basically, we've got each area's got different things to offer. So we've sent people to neighbouring authorities, to further away authorities, basically as part of their kind of training and development. I mean, I would hope that going forward, obviously, basically, we would look to work with yourselves on training, because obviously basically there are benefits in that basically all round. I mean, these are discussions certainly we can take away and have with basically with officers at Wokingham, and I'll get back to you.
Any other points or questions? In that case, I'll conclude with just saying this is a very good and solid report, and I fully endorse the idea that we grow our own people, that we train people and develop them. Especially in the labour market we have at the moment, it gets harder and harder to recruit. And if you've got people who just need to step sideways a bit into a different role or to skill up to do that, I think it's a good thing for the PPP, and it's also a good thing for those members of staff to be able to receive the training they need to do the jobs that are available. So I will move that we agree the training and development plan. Is that seconded? Please. There you are. Councillor Jones is seconding. All in favour? Any against? That's carried unanimously. And thank you, Mr. Green, for your input and report there. The next item on the agenda is the PPP service update and Q2 2021-22 performance report and COVID-19 response. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. So this report basically is in, I suppose, 3 sections. It'll be a report that's familiar to the committee. We have probably it's very many meetings now. It's come to you in this format or a very similar format. So what the report does is it sets out basically some of the cross-cutting issues for the service. So issues around finance, where we are with some of the things like HR, staffing, ICT, property issues, etc. And then moves on basically into a kind of team by team narrative of the work that's going on in the service. And this is basically a kind of update on previous reports we've had, but a number of these items will have been are kind of new items basically since you last received this report a couple of meetings back. I think probably, and then finally what you've got is the update on where we are on COVID. Now, obviously, basically this report was written 2 weeks ago and a lot's happened since then. But we're back basically to some extent in terms of the COVID work to our kind of role that we were back in perhaps pre-July, where there are now some restrictions in place for businesses. We have been working basically with things like event managers, and I was in discussions only this morning with one venue where, for example, the COVID certification thing may affect them basically, or will affect them going forward, and how that's going to be applied. As well as all of the work around local contact tracing, outbreak investigation, and various other aspects. So that work is now growing again, and obviously that will have an impact on, I suppose, the business as usual work until such time as basically it starts to hopefully settle down a bit. So I think what you've got before you basically is a kind of narrative report primarily. There are some examples, as I say, of work that are carried out in each team. There is also a list of hearings in there basically that have taken place with respect to licensing since in Q2, and then there is a summary under the section on page 76 of some of the recent legal actions taken basically by the Public Protection Service in terms of prosecutions, and just a few details there, just to really keep the community up to date with some of the work that's going on in the service. I don't know whether my colleague Moira, do you want to add anything on some of the measures of volume information that's at the back and the communications? Thank you.
And just to say that in terms of the measures of volume and the performance indicators, the strategic managers are busy revising those standards, and the report will be coming to you in March, where we will have re-looked at all the performance indicators to make sure that they're more fit for purpose and reflect the current work that the team is doing.
And then finally, Chair, you've got a communication summary. So you can see from that basically some examples of the output that we've had in the service, and also basically the activity around, for example, website usage. And you'll see in that quarter that there's still a fair number of, it's not like it was at the beginning of the COVID stuff where we were getting sort of 10,000 visitors basically each month to the website, but we're still getting, between top four to 6,000, and it has become a kind of very established now vehicle for the delivery of the service. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members have any questions or comments on the report? I have one to kick this off. So we've just been told we're going into Plan B, and part of that is to do with COVID passports for entry into certain venues. Is that going to entail a significant amount of extra work for the service?
So we have been trying to identify those venues and those events where this will apply. I mean, the regulations have actually only just been published this afternoon. So, but we did get the guidance this morning. So we have already identified a couple of venues where this would apply. But obviously there are some events where we're having to work through discussions with event organisers to see whether they meet the thresholds at any given time. So one of the thresholds being, for example, 4,000 standing, basically at any one time. Now, some of the events are dynamic, as you know, and they'll have throughput. The question is, did they reach those figures? And then there are other matters where, so things like clubs, areas where they may have dance floors that we need to work through if they're open beyond a certain time, and then indoor events basically of 500 or more. So we are literally just working through all of the details that we have about the premises in the area, the events that are going on, and we will work with all of those premises. Basically, we do have enforcement responsibility for that. As a service on behalf of the three authorities.
Any other questions? Councillor Jones. It's yours. Soon.
Chairman, thank you. One commentary, I suppose, reflection, and one question. The commentary come reflection is I've probably been as close to response to the COVID pandemic as anyone in the room, apart from Mr. Murphy, given that, on Gold at West Berkshire, and also I chair the Local Outbreak Engagement Board at West Berkshire. And indeed, we will have I've asked for another meeting to be called for next Monday. And Sean comes along to Local Outbreak Engagement Board and speaks to what the PPP is up to. And my reflection is the huge amount of work that PPP, the massive shift that officers in PPP have put in response to the pandemic. It is, let us not underestimate the amount of work that all three councils have had to do to meet the pandemic issues, and the amount of work that Sean and his team have been doing. And I want to congratulate them on a massive amount of work and a good job so far. And on that point, my question is, the recommendation in the paper, I mean, 1 and 3, to note the performance and note the role that the PPP is playing. I note both with alacrity. My question is whether what actions for areas of improvement of the service there might be. What are we being asked to look at under item 2? What areas for improvement might anyone think we should be looking at?
First of all, Councillor Bridgman, thank you for your kind words. I mean, it has been a difficult period for the service. It has been a very, very busy time, and I would commend the work really of the whole team, and it has been a whole team effort. In terms of areas for improvement, well, I would hope, obviously there's always areas for improvement, but I would hope that there's not too many. I guess we've set out really what we're doing. If there's any areas that you think that we're missing, if there are any areas that you think at this time perhaps need more focus, then we would obviously as a service be pleased to hear that, because what we want to do is to deliver for the communities, and obviously the people on this committee represent those communities.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you. I would also like to add my thanks to Sean's officers. I think they've, under really difficult circumstances, they performed brilliantly well and have achieved an awful lot for all three authorities. One thing I would say, the communications I've been impressed with. The newsletters that come out on a regular basis are very informative. They don't look as if they should be confidential, so I have passed them on to my residents. I've had two reactions. Is first, oh, it's nice to know what's going on, because I think PPP was largely invisible as a service to many residents, and they've now had their eyes opened, and they are very positive about the work that's being done. So keep that communication going. So I think people do actually now perhaps understand a bit more the role of PPP, irrespective of COVID, but especially with COVID as well.
Thank you for that. I mean, we have as a service invested in communication as a work stream. We do think it's very important. We have a kind of lead officer really for kind of community engagement, and I do think that's a really important aspect of our work, because we do need people to talk to us. That's really important. I talk about intelligence, but we need to get that preventative advice. But above all, we need residents to talk to us and tell us what it is that's concerning them, so we can target our resources appropriate. But thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, and Councillor Bridgman and Councillor Moira Fraser. Would you like?
Just on that point about the communication, I just wanted to say that we are also working with the parish councils. We're going to be meeting with the parish councils in West Berkshire, and we have already met with the parish councils in Bracknell to kind of explain to them a lot more about the work that the PPP does, so that they know when it would be appropriate to come along and speak to us.
And likewise, I mean, I've also had individual meetings with parish councils and neighbourhood action groups and things like this. So I've done some of that in Wokingham as well. We just really want to get the message out there. I mean, the important thing is that people understand what we do. They understand where to come if there are issues that they think we need to know about. Everything we can help people. So yeah, the communication is really, really key to everything that's really on the agenda tonight.
Thank you all, and I'd like to add my sort of thanks to those of Councillor Bridgman and Councillor Jones in saying that I think that the staff of the Public Protection Partnership Service have really stepped up to the mark in their response to COVID while keeping everything else going as well. And their support for the councils in the area and the work of the staff in the councils on COVID has been exceptional, and it's been a very difficult time. But I would then like to add to the recommendations that we actually commend the staff of the PPP for the work that they've done during the difficult time. So I will move the recommendation, but also that we commend the staff for the hard work that they've put in and going above and beyond when it comes to the work.
Chairman, if I may, on that recommendation, I mean, as I said, the second item is to identify any improvement. I am not seeking to identify any improvement. I think I would ignore bullet 2 and just go with the 2 to note, and I absolutely endorse what you've just said about commending staff.
That's right, and we haven't actually put forward any areas for improvement, so that bullet point falls anyway. So is that seconded? Thank you. All in favour? Against? That carried. Thank you very much. Item 10 is the approach to CCTV and surveillance. Mr. Murphy, or is it Mr. Anstie?
Chair, Paul Anstie is going to introduce this paper. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman. This report essentially follows on from previous discussions that the committee has had, and really this is just about looking at the practical examples of how we implement certain pieces of legislation, and to give the committee just a sort of a broad overview of some of the implications and the sensitivities that we have to manage as a service. So in terms of the work that the 3 individual authorities will be aware of, we are regulated by external bodies on how we manage information that's collected as part of our surveillance powers. And obviously we have to interact with the judicial system in order to gain permissions in certain instances as well. So you'll see from the report a series of examples that I have tried to give a broad understanding of how the officers need to go through the different procedures, and obviously the nature of the services that are then implemented into the community to make sure that we've got the right checks and balances in place for any information that we hold. So hopefully this just gives a little flavour and it gives a bit more detail to those works. And in terms of some of the technologies that we use, obviously the body-worn cameras is a slightly more modern-facing element of what we do, particularly around executing of warrants and the work that is done in order to make sure we protect the health and safety of our staff when we're out doing these investigations. And I think sometimes it can be forgotten that some of the characters that we end up dealing with are perhaps on the slightly more serious end of organised crime, and we have to make sure that we give all adequate protections to our staff when we're executing those investigations. So it gives you, as I say, an across the board view of some of the implementation of surveillance, but I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Well, Mr. Anstie, I think the report has answered all people's potential questions. It's a very clear report and it does really go into those different areas of surveillance. So thank you very much for that. It is a very useful report, and it brings us up to date on how we're doing it and what we're doing.
Very welcome.
I move, therefore, that we note the report, and all the business of the meeting is now concluded. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending and wish you all a very happy Christmas. Good night all.